There is a scholar, a real one, not the kind in movies, sitting at a desk covered in Greek lexicons and yellow legal pads, and he is doing something almost obsessive. He is counting. He is counting one word, a single Greek verb. And he is going through the Gospel of John, page by page, occurrence by occurrence, and every time he finds it, he makes a mark. When he finishes, he has 98 marks, 98 times, in 21 chapters, one gospel, one verb. The word is pisteuō. It means to believe, to trust, to commit yourself, fully, actively, without holding back, to something or someone you cannot fully see. 98 times, John uses that word. Matthew uses it 10 times. Mark uses it 10 times. Luke uses it 9 times. John uses it more than all three of them combined, more than Matthew, Mark, and Luke put together, and then nearly doubled. Now the scholar does something else. He goes looking for the noun. In Greek, you can take a verb and make it a thing. Pisteuō becomes pistis. To believe becomes faith. And pistis, that noun, that thing, that possession, appears 243 times across the rest of the New Testament. He looks for it in John. He finds it 0 times. Not once. In the gospel most obsessed with belief, the word faith does not appear. Not in a footnote, not in passing, not once. This is not an accident. John was not careless. He was the most deliberate writer in the New Testament. He had read the other Gospels. He knew what he was doing. And there is one more thing, one moment in this Gospel where a powerful man asks a direct question, and Jesus, who has an answer for everything, says absolutely nothing. We will come back to that silence. Because the silence, it turns out, as it with the answer. This is not a grammar lesson. This is not a word study for seminaries. This is an invitation, one that has been sitting in the text for 2,000 years, disguised as a gospel, and it starts with a verb. To understand why that verb matters, you have to watch it work. You have to watch it happen to real people, people with names and histories and things to lose, and see what it does to them when it lands. The first person is a man named Nicodemus. He is a Pharisee, which means he has memorized the Torah by the time he is 12 years old. He is a member of the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of Jerusalem. 71 men who hold the spiritual and legal authority of an entire nation. He is not young. He is not naive. He is not the kind of man who chases rumors, and he comes to Jesus. At night. John tells you that detail deliberately. At night. Not at noon in the marketplace, not on the Sabbath in the synagogue courtyard. At night, when no one can see, when there are no witnesses, when the cost of association can be minimized. He comes and he says, "Rabbi, we know you are a teacher who has come from God. We know. Not I wonder. Not I suspect. We know." And yet he comes at night. Here is what you need to understand about pisteuō. The verb in Greek carries a direction. You do not just believe. You believe into something. The preposition John uses most often is iakouos. Pisteuō. Pisteuō, to believe in into, to commit yourself toward, to move in the direction of. Nicodemus knows something is true, but he has not yet moved toward it. Not in the open, not where it costs him something. He will appear 2 more times in this gospel. In chapter 7, he speaks up for Jesus at a council meeting, barely, cautiously, on a technicality. In chapter 19, after the crucifixion, he comes with 75 pounds of spices, to help bury a dead man he could not publicly follow while that man was alive. 2 more appearances, 2 more steps. Slow, costly, incomplete, and real. Nicodemus is the longest conversion in John's Gospel, and John includes all 3 appearances on purpose. The second person is a woman whose name John never gives us, and that silence is almost certainly intentional too. She is a Samaritan. She is drawing water from a well at noon, not in the morning with the other women, but alone, in the heat of the day, which in that culture tells you almost everything you need to know about her social standing. She has had 5 husbands. She is currently with a man she is not married to. She is, as by every measure of her world, someone whose opinion about anything matters to no one. Jesus asks her for a drink of water. What follows is the longest recorded conversation Jesus has with any single individual in all world. He speaks to her, not at her, not about her, not around her, for what must be 20 or 30 minutes. He tells her things about herself she has never said aloud. He tells her things about God that no rabbi in Jerusalem would tell a woman on the street, let alone a Samaritan woman at a well at noon. And something happens to her. She leaves her water jar. That detail has stopped commentators for centuries. She came to get water. She forgets the jar. She runs back to the city full of people who avoid her, and she says to them, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" She does not say, "I believe." She asks a question, but the question is pisteuō in motion. She is moving towards something. She is pulling others with her. By the end of the chapter, the people of that city tell her, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves." She was the first evangelist of John's Gospel, and she was the last person anyone in that world would have chosen for the job. The third person has no name either, but he has a detail John will not let you forget. He was born blind, not struck blind, born that way. He has never seen a human face. He has never seen the color of the sky. He sits at the city gate and begs, because that is the only life available to him. Jesus stops, mixes mud, puts it on the man's eyes, tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. He goes, he washes, he sees. And then, here is what most people miss. The healing is almost immediately the smaller part of the story. What John lingers over is what comes next. The Pharisees drag the man in for questioning. His parents are called in and interrogated. Under pressure, they distance themselves from their own son. Ask him. He is of age. The man is questioned a second time, then a third. And each time, instead of backing down, he gets clearer, more direct, more specific. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. They throw him out of the synagogue. Excommunication. In that world, it is economic ruin, social death, spiritual exile. And then John records something that happens in no other healing story in the Gospels. Jesus goes and finds him, not the other way around. Jesus looks for this man, who has just lost everything for him, finds him, and asks, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man says, "Who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." And when Jesus says, "You have now seen him," in fact, he is the one speaking with you, the man falls on his face. Pisteuō, under interrogation, under excommunication, with nothing left to lose. That is what John wants you to see. So you have Nicodemus, who believes slowly and in private. You have the Samaritan woman, who believes all at once and tells everyone immediately. You have the man born blind, who believes under fire, at great personal cost, with no safety net. 3 people. 3 completely different speeds, styles, and circumstances. And then John gives you a 4th case. And this one is the strangest of all. In chapter 12, almost as a footnote, John makes an observation that stops the story cold. He writes, "Yet at the same time, many even among the leaders believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith, for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved human praise more than praise from God." Read that again slowly. Many of the leaders believed. The verb is pisteuō. It is the same word, the same action. The belief is apparently real. John is not saying they were deceiving themselves. He is saying they believed. And then he says they stayed silent. They chose the approval of powerful men over the acknowledgement of the God they claimed to serve. Stay with me, because this is the hinge of the entire gospel. John has introduced a concept, meno, the verb to remain, to abide, 40 times across these 21 chapters. Belief, in John's mind, is not a transaction. It is not a moment that you cash in and walk away from. It is a dwelling place. You believe into something, and then you stay in it. You remain. You abide. The light stays on. These rulers believed, and then they chose not to remain. They stepped into the country and immediately stepped back out, because the cost of staying was too high. This is not John being harsh. This is John being precise. He is showing you the full spectrum. On one end, the man born blind, who loses everything and believes harder. On the other end, men who have everything and choose to keep it basit. And the question John is placing in front of you, right here at the midpoint of this video, is simple. Where are you? That spectrum. Comment below right now. Type the number 1 if you have ever known something was true, but could not bring yourself to say it out loud. In a conversation, in a relationship, in a room where it would have cost you something. Type the number 2 if you have ever had a moment where belief cost you something real, a friendship, a reputation, a version of yourself you had to leave behind. There is no wrong answer. Both numbers are in this gospel. John put them both there on purpose. But here is what comes next in the story, and why the pattern you have just seen is about to be tested in the most personal way possible. Because one man in this gospel refuses to believe, refuses loudly, and in writing, in front of witnesses. And then the room fills again, and what happens to him will change the way you read the last page of this book. His name is Thomas. John tells you his Greek nickname, Didymus, the twin. Nobody in the Gospels tells us who his twin was. Some scholars think the name is a personality marker, a man split in two, always seeing both sides, never fully landing on one. That may be too clever, but it is not wrong. Thomas appears 3 times in John's Gospel before the resurrection. Each time, his words are marked by a specific kind of honesty that makes him uncomfortable to be around. In chapter 11, when Jesus announces he is going back to Judea, where people have already tried to stone him, Thomas says to the other disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Not a question, not a protest, a statement. If we go, we die. Let's go. That is not cowardice. That is the opposite of cowardice. Thomas is the disciple who says out loud what the others are thinking and hoping no one will say. He sees clearly. He speaks plainly. And when something does not make sense to him, he says so. In chapter 14, when Jesus says, "You know the way to the place where I am going." Thomas interrupts. "Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way?" Again, not faithless, honest. The other disciples presumably nodded along. Thomas asked the question. And then Jesus is crucified and buried. And on the third day, the other disciples see him in a locked room with the doors shut, the risen Jesus standing among them, showing them his hands and his side. Thomas is not there. We do not know where he is. We do not know why he missed it. John does not tell us, which means John does not consider the reason important. What matters is what Thomas says when the others come running to him with the news. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Not, "I find this hard to credit." Not, "Are you sure?" He draws a line. He defines his terms. He specifies exactly what evidence he requires. He uses the verb pisteuō in the negative future tense. I will not believe. 8 days pass. 8 days of the other disciples living in the glow of something Thomas has ruled out. 8 days of Thomas going to sleep and waking up with the same decision in place. 8 days. And then, pay attention to this, Jesus comes again to the locked room, same closed doors. And this time, Thomas is there. Jesus looks at him, and without Thomas saying a word, without Thomas repeating his conditions, Jesus says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." He knew. He knew exactly what Thomas had said. He knew the terms Thomas had set. And he came back. 8 days later. For one man. Now, here is the part nobody tells you. John never says Thomas touched the wounds. He says Jesus invited him to. But the next thing we read is Thomas's response. And it is the highest Christological statement in all four Gospels. My Lord and my God. Not my teacher, not my rabbi, not even my Messiah. My Lord and my God. 2 titles. The first is the Greek kyrios, the word the Greek Old Testament uses for YHWH. The second is theos, God himself. Thomas collapses all distance between Jesus and the God of Israel in 7 words. And this is where it gets remarkable. Jesus does not correct him. He does not say, "Steady on, Thomas, I'm not quite that." He says, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." The man who refused to believe produces the greatest confession of belief in the entire gospel. And then, because John is always precise, Jesus turns that confession into a blessing aimed directly at you. Not Thomas. You. The one watching this video 2,000 years later, who was not in that room. Blessed are those who have not seen. Pisteuō without seeing. That is what the whole gospel has been building toward. But there is one man in this story who also stood in a room with Jesus, who also asked a question, and Jesus gave him nothing. No invitation, no second chance, no wounds to touch, just silence. We are almost there. His name is Pontius Pilate. He is the Roman prefect of Judea, the most powerful man in the room by every worldly measure. He has the authority to crucify or release. He has soldiers outside and a political career in Rome to protect. He is not stupid, and he is not cruel by the standards of his office. He is pragmatic. He is calculating. He is trying to find a way out of a problem that has landed on his doorstep before breakfast. Jesus has been brought to him in chains. The Jewish leaders will not enter the praetorium, the Roman headquarters, because entering a Gentile building during Passover week would make them ceremonially unclean, and they have come here specifically to get a man killed for blasphemy. And the irony of that does not appear to trouble them. Pilate goes back and forth, literally, in and out of the building. He interviews Jesus inside. He speaks to the crowd outside. He is trying to mediate a situation where both sides want something he cannot give them without destroying either his conscience or his career. Inside the praetorium, he asks Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answers him, not directly, but genuinely. He speaks about his kingdom. He says, "For this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And Pilate asks his question, "What is truth?" And then he walks back outside. The sentence ends. The scene moves on. There is no answer recorded. For 2,000 years, readers have assumed Jesus was silent, that he said nothing, that Pilate did not wait for a response, that the question was rhetorical, the gesture of a tired man who had stopped believing that truth was a real thing that mattered. Many scholars treat it as cynicism. Pilate the pragmatist, dismissing philosophy as a luxury he cannot afford. But here is what I want you to see. Jesus had already answered that question. 5 chapters earlier, in chapter 14, in that same upper room, to those same disciples, Jesus had said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Not, "I know the truth." Not, "I teach the truth." I am the truth. Pilate asked for a proposition, a definition, an argument he could evaluate and file away. And Jesus had already given him something far larger than a proposition. He had given him a person, himself. Standing right there in the praetorium, in chains, looking back at Pilate, with the full weight of the universe behind his eyes. The silence was not an absence of an answer. The silence was the answer, refusing to be reduced. This is what John has been building toward for 20 chapters. Pisteuō is not about intellectual agreement with a set of facts. It is not about carrying the right information in your head. It is about committing yourself, moving, choosing, crossing a threshold toward a person who cannot be fully explained and who does not need to be. Pilate had the same opportunity as Nicodemus, the same invitation as the Samaritan woman, the same crisis as the man born blind. He stood in the same room as Thomas, and more than that, he stood in the same room as Jesus himself. Not a rumor of him, not a report of him. The man in front of him, and he walked back outside. And John records no second visit, no locked room 8 days later, no wounds offered to touch. Some doors, John seems to suggest, close quietly. The man who asked, "What is truth?" walked away from the answer. Not because the answer was hidden, because the answer was a person. And he chose not to believe into that person, not to move toward him, not to stay. And somewhere, in some version of your own story, you have been in that praetorium. You have stood near something true. You have asked a version of that question, real or silent, late at night or in the middle of a conversation you didn't know was going to matter. The question is not whether Jesus answered Pilate. He had already answered. The question is whether you are still waiting for a different kind of answer, a crisper argument, a cleaner proof, a proposition you can hold at a safe distance. Or whether you are ready to do what John's gospel has been asking you to do from the first verse to the last. To believe, not as a noun, as a verb. Right now, ongoing, into. John ends his gospel with a sentence that almost didn't make it into the canon. Chapter 21 is widely considered a kind of epilogue, added, some scholars think, after the main body was complete. And the very last verse of the very last chapter says this, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. That is not humility. That is John telling you, at the very end, that what you have just read is a selection. A curated, deliberate, precisely chosen set of stories. And every single one of them was chosen because it shows you the same verb in a different light. So here are 3 things to carry with you. The first, John chose a verb on purpose. He could have used pistis, faith, the noun, the possession, the thing you acquire and put on a shelf. He refused it. He used pisteuō, the action, the motion, the ongoing commitment. Belief in John's gospel is never something you had. It is always something you are doing or failing to do right now, in this moment. That distinction is not theological hair-splitting. It is the difference between a map and a journey. The second, every character in this gospel is a mirror. Nicodemus, slow and private. The Samaritan woman, sudden and public. The man born blind, forged under fire. The silent rulers, holding back. Thomas, refusing until he couldn't. Pilate, walking away. One of them is you, maybe more than one, at different seasons of your life. John put them all in the same book so you would see yourself, so you would know you are not the first person to be where you are. And the third, the one that matters most, the word John refused to use, is the one we have made the centerpiece of entire religious systems. We turned pisteuō into a noun, put it in a frame, hung it on a wall, and called it faith. We made it a thing to have, rather than the something to do. And John, the man who knew Jesus better than almost anyone, who watched him from closer than almost anyone, who lived long enough to see the church begin to calcify around its own language, John said no. He said it with every chapter he wrote. 98 times he said it. Faith is not a thing you carry. It is something you do. Every morning. When the room is locked. When the cost is real. When you are the one who missed it, and you are not sure you believe the people who say they saw something. Pisteuō. Keep believing. Which character in John's Gospel do you most identify with right now? And why? Leave it in the comments. I read every one. If this opened something for you, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper into the text. And like this video, it genuinely helps more people find it. John didn't write a gospel. He wrote an invitation. And it's still open.